Thank you so much for joining us for digital inclusivity. We're going to be talking about best practices in digital accessibility to create inclusive work, teaching, and learning environments. And we're going to start out by doing some introductions first. In order to be inclusive to people with visual disabilities, we're going to go ahead and describe ourselves as presenters in this presentation today. My name is Sandy Rendolkowski, and I coordinate the digital accessibility program here at UW-Madison. My pronouns are she, hers, her. And just to give you a visual description of myself, I am a Caucasian woman in my 40s. I have short black hair, and I'm in my home office surrounded by books and sculptures. Next, I'd like to pass it to Jess. Jess, would you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jess Jones. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the interim director for the Center for User Experience at UW-Madison. To give you a visual of myself, I'm a white woman with long hair, and I'm sitting in a guest bedroom because that's work from home life, and I'm very happy to be here with you all today. And I'd like to pass it to our wonderful student employee, Kurt Muckstad, to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Kurt Muckstad. I'm student digital accessibility and usability evaluator, and I use they, them pronouns. I am a white non-binary person with short brown hair, wearing a blue shirt and sitting behind a set of white doors. And I'll be in the chat today answering questions and sending some important links during the presentation. And I'm going to pass the mic to Ruben now.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Kurt. My name is Ruben Moda. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the Campus Americans with Disabilities Act Coordinator. I work out of the Office of Compliance, and a visual description of me, includes I am a person of color with medium complexion. I identify as a person with multiple disabilities. I'm sitting in my campus office. I'm wearing a collared button-down shirt with dog print on it. I'm wearing a blazer, and behind me is a door that is shut with blinds and a drawing that was completed by some of my ninth graders from a previous career. And behind me is a poster that reads, ADA, 31 years is enough notice. On this slide, I'd just like to give a visual representation to the slide. There is a photo on this slide, and it shows a service provider who is translating speech to text using a stenograph and laptop at a Niall Marco event at the Memorial Union here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. As we advance to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about our four main objectives today. On this slide, we have a photo of a person walking with their service animal. The service animal is guiding them through a bridge leash. They are approaching a University of Wisconsin building that has the University of Wisconsin crest on the window pane, and slightly blurred out, it identifies the two offices in this building as the Office of Admissions and Recruitment and the McBurney Disability Resource Center. On this slide, we have four main objectives that we hope to identify during today's presentation. We'll highlight how the COVID-19 pandemic brought to light the digital divide caused by inaccessible technology and the need for inclusive digital best practices. Our second objective today is to highlight how the university incorporates inclusivity in its digital resources and information technology through the creation of campus resources. A third objective is to identify the university's evolution of creating a shared responsibility and commitment to an accessible digital ecosystem that benefits all users. And our final objective today is to identify the need for centralized infrastructure to support digital accessibility implementation across our university's business and operational decisions.
So to start, we want to make sure that we are all on a level playing field about what we mean by digital accessibility. This is a term you may have heard, but we want to be sure to define it so as we move forward, we all know what we're talking about with that term. Digital accessibility, as it says on the slide, is the practice of ensuring that digital resources can be used by members of the university community who have a diverse range of abilities. These digital resources include websites, emails, documents, video, web and mobile apps, software, and more. We also want to acknowledge that disability is a facet of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is intersectional, as is inclusion and equity. And we want to highlight that disability is just as much a facet of identity as much as any other facet is. It also intersects with other facets of diversity. I'm sure you've heard talk of intersectionality today in other presentations. And that intersection of disability and other identities is its own unique experience of barriers and oppression.
We also want to talk about the impacts of inaccessible technology on people with disabilities. People with disabilities need to gain access and participate in the same way as everyone else. This 60-second video made by women tech makers talks about what web accessibility is and how inaccessible websites impact people with disabilities.
Do you want your visitors to browse your website like this? Or do you want to watch this video? Or if I told you that in order to check out, you have to pick the green button, could you? Not without being frustrated. And this is why I'm going to tell you about the importance of web accessibility in 1 minute. So what is web accessibility? It's the idea that technology must be equally accessible for people with and without disabilities, and that any barriers to accessing the web are removed. High five, Sir TVL. Who are we helping when we make our sites accessible? Visitors with visual disabilities, such as low vision or color blindness. Auditory disabilities, such as deafness. Cognitive and neurological disabilities, which can include visitors with learning disabilities or people affected by seizures. And physical and motor disabilities, such as repetitive stress injury or muscular dystrophy. Not to mention, it can also enhance various other experiences, like visitors on a slow internet connection. But how do we make our sites accessible? Luckily, we have established standards to follow. These best practices show us the importance of having semantic heading structures, to ensuring proper color contrast, to providing text alternatives for video content. Now that you're ready to start making your website accessible,
Thank you so much for watching that video that talks about what it's like for people with disabilities to experience websites that are not fully accessible.
This is Ruben. The title of this slide is "The Pandemic Intensified the Impacts of Inaccessible Technology." On this slide, we have a photo of 3 individuals sitting in what appears to be a university classroom or lab. They're seated around a table, and 2 of the individuals are engaged in a conversation, and sign language interpreting is being provided. So we all recall during that intense period in March 2020, in which the pandemic caused the university to pivot its instruction towards in-person to mostly a digital and remote mode of operations. And this pandemic highlighted inaccessible technology through some instances of inaccessible videos that were created as a result of the need to go towards remote or asynchronous instruction. These videos contained a lack or did not contain captioning. We also saw an increased use in video conferencing tools that we perhaps were not familiar with prior to the pandemic, but that we relied on heavily. And we noted that some of these video conferencing tools did not have auto or machine captioning features embedded in their applications. We also noted a lack of access for some individuals to these video conferencing tools due to slow or intermittent internet connectivity issues. Some individuals, as we may recall, might have needed to participate through telephone dial-in. which doesn't enable for video access. We also became aware, particularly with our students and some of our employees who don't have access to computers, tablets, or peripheral devices such as printers. So many of these individuals rely on our university resources, which were not available to them, such as our computer labs or the opportunity to check out technology, because they either had to work from home or they went back home to participate in the university's academic services. Or perhaps their sibling might have needed to use the computer for their own classes, such as participating remotely for their elementary or high school learning activities. We also saw an increased reliance on documents, PowerPoints, and digital tools within Canvas, our learning management system. And some of these resources and tools that were used were not accessible. They might have been missing heading structures or alternative text descriptions for any photos. We also noted inaccessible apps and software applications, for example, that were procured during the pandemic to support the university's operations. And some of these tools had accessibility barriers such as color contrasting or screen magnification or reflow issues. Some of these tools also were not screen reader compatible. As an institution, we often think about how we operate through the provision of a reasonable accommodation. And as we navigate to the next slide, we're going to focus a little bit about what is an accommodation. So we often tend to operate in a reactive manner when it comes to dealing with moments of inaccessibility, or when we're facing with accessibility barriers in our physical or digital landscape. So we may know that individuals with disabilities are required, the university is required to provide individuals with disabilities reasonable accommodations under federal and state laws. And some reasonable accommodations can include auxiliary aids. A reasonable accommodation can be an auxiliary aid, an adjustment, a service, or a modification. And some examples of reasonable accommodations include sign language interpreting, captioning, which you might currently be experiencing in this presentation, audio descriptions, which seek to audibly describe visual information on a moving scene or multimedia, extra time on an exam, or even the relocation of an event to a more accessible or inclusive space, or even the acquisition of a standing desk for someone facing a physical barrier in either their academic or workplace setting. We want to note that accommodations, when we need to provide accommodations, that really highlights the barriers in our built or digital environment. And those existing accommodations we really observed and noticed during the pandemic needed to be quickly adjusted and altered to the new digital environment that we found ourselves in. For example, as our instructors pivoted to remote instruction, we saw an increase in the use of media captioning. We saw an increase in the use of multimedia, which required the provision of media captioning. We also provided live event captioning for some of our signature campus events, such as commencement, and some of our other events, such as Go Big Read or the Diversity Forum. And so we saw, as we pivoted to a remote format, that we saw an increase in media captioning, for example, but also, interestingly, we saw a decrease in captioning for sign language interpreting, for example, as many of our classes went from a synchronous format, or our events went from a synchronous format to an asynchronous format. Interestingly, across a study of a note-taking service also revealed that note-taking accommodation requests decreased during the pandemic, and this is possibly as a result of individuals being able to watch or learn or engage in their classes asynchronously and have access to recordings. Over to you, Sandy.
Apologies. Thank you so much, Ruben. So next we're going to talk about the not so new digital divide. During normal sort of circumstances, people with disabilities have been excluded when it comes to technological advancements and including digital accessibility in the design of technology. When large-scale global trauma takes place, like the public health issue, like COVID, it really exhumes and emphasizes that digital divide that already exists. So we must understand what it's like for people with disabilities to navigate these digital environments without them being accessible. And to do that, we're going to go ahead and try to put ourselves in the shoes of people with disabilities. So I'm going to demo for you what it's like to navigate through a website using a screen reader. When people use a screen reader, they're navigating based on the auditory user experience. They're listening through the screen reader. And the screen reader is going to dictate, much like a narrator reading a book, what content exists on a website, as well as what you can do with it. And having that contextual information, as well as being able to navigate via keyboard, because people who are blind or severely low vision are not able to use a trackpad or mouse. So you have to navigate via keyboard and rely on the auditory user experience to do what you need to do. We are going to go ahead and get our COVID booster shot through Walgreens website, which includes some accessibility features. So starting here, we're just going to remind ourselves that 1 in 4 people in America have a disability, that navigating via screen reader is the common way to navigate online for people who are blind or have severe low vision. I'm going to turn on my screen reader. I'm using a Mac, and I'm going to turn on VoiceOver, which is the native screen reader.
Voice. This banner. Chrome has new window. You are currently on a banner inside of web content. Promo. Region. Link. Free same-day delivery today. Link. Check out the Jess Jones is editing this present. Link. Buy 2 get 3rd free skincare. End of. Promo. Top navigation with the logo. Search field. Visited. Link. Walgreens home.
Okay, so listening to a screen reader, you can hear everything. So a screen reader auditorily relates everything that's happening from the operating system functions to what's happening in the browser. So what you could hear there is that we're on a Walgreens website. We ran through that top part of the banner where there's some promo information, and we're going to continue navigating now.
Menu. Collapsed button.
And when you hear these things, imagine you can't see this visual user experience. Instead, you are relying on the auditory user experience to show you a menu that is collapsed, that's talking you through. So as you're listening, compare what you're seeing to what you're hearing and identify for yourself if it's enough for you to get through. The task at hand is to schedule a booster shot.
Search by keyword or item number. Search by keyword or item number. Menu pop-up combo box.
Okay, so that's telling us there's a search input on this website that I can search, but I don't really know what keywords to type in right now, so I'm going to continue looking.
Search button. Account. Collapsed button. Link. Press enter to view shopping cart with 0 items. Chrome has new window. End of. Top navigation with end of banner. Selected store.
Okay, so far I found my account information. I don't want to go there yet. I've heard that there's a cart that exists. It's empty. That's great. You're moving forward.
Selected store 1705 microseconds Highway 51 and 138 Stoughton, WI, button.
Well, I work remotely and I'm a person with disabilities who is trying to navigate this website. I can hear that my selected store is in Stoughton, although the address got a little garbled because that number 1705 US Highway 51 and 138, that would be understandable if the screen reader said it just the way I did just now. But however, the screen reader did not read it that way. The screen reader read it 1705 US Highway. It's harder for people with disabilities then to track that language because it's not innate to the way we normally speak. So when making this website, which has some accessibility features, but needs to be more accessible, the developer would then add in some ARIA labeling into the code to change the way that 1705 reads to say it 1705 instead of 1705. So I'm going to keep moving forward. It did say my location, which is important for searching for a booster shot because it's going to search in your area.
Main. You are heading level 1 info and heading level 1 Walgreens Pharmacy Health and Well.
That's great. So there's heading levels on this page, which is important because if I'm a person with visual disabilities navigating the website, heading levels, much like climbing up and down a ladder, tells me where the content sits on the page and helps for me to navigate up and down that page.
Info, empty group, COVID-19 vaccine update. CDC now recommends the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for children ages 5-11. Appointments for pediatric doses will be available at select stores beginning Saturday, November 6th. Link, CDC recommends children's vaccine. Chrome has new window.
Okay, so I'm trying to schedule a booster shot or a COVID vaccine shot. This link to a visual user says schedule now. I could click on that and I could go schedule a vaccine, but because the auditory user experience isn't reading that same label, it's reading
CO link, CDC recommends children's vaccine.
I don't know that that is an action link for me to schedule my COVID vaccine, so I'm going to keep moving forward.
Visited link, your vaccination destination trademark schedule vaccine. You are currently on a link.
So that does say it's a link. It did say schedule a vaccine. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that by hitting enter.
COVID-19 vaccination vertical line Walgreens immunization 50 visited link. Skip to main content. Visited link. Skip.
So all that chatter as a screen reader user told me that the page refreshed and that I'm still on the Walgreens website and that I haven't been kicked over to a different website, which can be extremely disorienting. But it's important that the screen reader tells us that, which it did.
Banner. You promo region. You link end of promo top navigation visited link Walgreens home menu search button. Top end up link promo banner visited link skip to main content.
I do want to mention that skip to main content links on a website are really important because a screen reader user can click on that skip to main content link, jump past that banner and global navigation information and go straight into the body content of the page, which I'm going to attempt to do.
COVID-19 vaccine. Require invalid data. Radio button. 1 of 3. Main.
So it's great that the body content is where my focus, which is this box that you're seeing, ended up. That's awesome. When I'm reading the question options here and I'm starting to fill out this form, that question option just read the option language, but didn't read the question. So I don't really know where I'm at. What should happen is that radio button that I'm sitting on should say COVID-19 vaccine. What type of vaccine is needed today?
Flu vaccine. Require COVID-19 additional dose or booster. COVID-19 vaccine. COVID-19 additional dose or booster. Required selected radio button. 2 of.
Okay, so I want that booster, so I'm going to go ahead and select that, and I'm going to tab away to the
link. Additional link. Boost link. 53,000 star date of birth. 53,701 star ZIP code or city and state. Required menu pop-up combo box. Where does the patient want to get vaccinated? Group. Enter the.
So in this input field, I navigated in, and the question did read here, which is great. And it read as required, which is how it should read. That's the information that I need to know. It wants my zip code, so I'm going to go ahead and type that in.
5 result 53,589. 5 results available. Keyboard users use up and down arrows to review and enter to select. You are currently on a menu pop-up combo box. Type text or to display a list 53,589.
So unfortunately, the combo box did attempt to support Keyboard Navigator, but I was not able to enter into that drop-down menu using the keys described. So I used the arrow keys as I was supposed to be able to, and I wasn't able to get into those options, and the box did close. So I'm going to keep navigating. So this has not stopped me from filling out the form.
Star date of birth. Require invalid data. Edit text. Enter the patient's date. Enter the patient's date. Enter the patient's date.
Just some minor bumps along the road there in terms of accessibility, but but nothing's stopping me yet. This one's asking for my date of birth. I'm going to go
Enter valid.
put that
6.
in.
Enter valid. 1. 9. Enter valid date of birth in the MMDDII format. 8. Enter valid date of birth in the MMDDII format. 0. 1980. You are
So that's good. It's telling me what format I need to have it in. I know that I typed it into that format. I'm going to move on to the next one.
1. Required invalid data. Radio button. 1 of 2. Main. You are currently on a radio button. 1 of 2. 2.
So our inputs here in this form, as a screen reader user, I'm not completely frustrated yet. I'm able to input these text fields. I'm able to use the radio button data that was before, but now I've hit a radio button that has a really incomplete answer. All it says is 1. I don't know what the question is. I have to navigate around to find out what it is. So this type of design, really, it should say, I have 1 dose or 1 dose of COVID vaccine, 2 doses of COVID vaccine. That would give me at least a sense of what I'm looking at. And then also, or what I'm hearing, I'm sorry. And also, programmatically, these questions should be connected to these answers. So what it should say is radio button, 1 dose of COVID vaccine. How many doses of COVID vaccine has the patient received? So that's normally what happens.
2. Pfizer or Moderna. Required link. As defined by the CDC. Is the patient immune? No. Required invalid data. Radio button. 1 of 2. Link. As defined by the CDC. Is the patient immunocompromised? As defined by the CDC. Group. No. Required invalid data. Radio button. 1 of 2. Main. You required selected. SAR date of last dose. Required edit text. What are the details of the patient's last dose? Group. SAR what are
Okay, so I wanted to bring you here because this is at a point where a screen reader user would not be able to complete this form. If you are requesting a booster shot, you need to put in the date of your last vaccine shot. And here, you're not able to type it in. It doesn't let you type anything in. And in order to navigate this, I'm going to try to keyboard navigate into this calendar widget.
help information about date of first dose? Red. Select the date of help. SAR date of don't guess. SAR what are don't SAR date of last dose. Required edit text. Select the date of the patient. Select the date of the patient's. Select SAR date of last dose. Required edit text. In edit text button. If space. You out of tab.
Yeah. So
Chrome. COVID-19 vaccination vertical line wall. If the patient has received.
in short, it's not going to let me navigate. I can't get into that date box to include its
Star.
occurring.
You are currently on a text.
So that's where we end, and that's where a person with disabilities would need to seek assistance to be able to complete this form.
F5. Voiceover off.
So hopefully that was just a little sample of what it's like for a person who has visual disabilities to navigate via screen reader through a vital and essential task that everyone needs to be able to do on a common website like Walgreens. Next, we're going to talk about what it's like to experience inaccessible video content. We're going to show you 2 groups of video samples. One group is going to focus on hearing loss, the accessibility for hearing loss. When people have hearing loss, they enjoy video content through watching it, not hearing it, right? So watching it, watching the video visually, watching captions, and so the captions need to be good, inclusive captions. Accessibility for visual disabilities when it comes to videos is listening. People with visual disabilities, they aren't watching the video, right? They are listening to the video. So good audio descriptions is the key thing for accessibility here. We're going to watch this video now.
The following videos are examples of the inconsistencies associated with closed captioning and video description. Video 1. Example contains video but no audio and no captions. Video 2. Example contains video but no audio and bad captions. Video 3. Example contains video but no audio and good captions. Video 4. Example contains audio but no video, good captions, and no video descriptions.
Feed me. Feed me. Feed me. Who said that? You said that. You said that. Feed me. You said that. You can talk. I got a talking plant.
Video 5. Example contains audio but no video, good captions, and bad video descriptions.
Feed me.
Man reading at the flower shop.
Feed me. Feed me.
Falls on the ground.
Who said that?
Points to the
You
plant.
said that. You said that. Feed
Plant
me.
speaks.
You said that. You can talk. I got a talking
Man
plant.
stands.
Video 6. Example contains audio but no video, good captions, and good video descriptions.
Man reading at the flower shop.
Me.
Looks over at plant. Looks to the left and to the right.
Feed me.
Looks under the table.
Feed me.
Falls on the ground. Stands up.
Who said that? You said that.
Points to the plant.
You said that.
Plant speaks.
Feed me. You said that. You can talk.
Man
I
stands.
got a talking plant.
Video 7. Example contains audio and video, good captions, and good video descriptions.
Man reading at the flower shop.
Me.
Looks over at plant. Looks to the left and to the right.
Feed me.
Looks under the table.
Feed me.
Falls on the ground. Stands up.
Who said that? You said that.
Points to the plant.
You said that.
Plant speaks.
Feed me. You said that. You can talk.
Man
I
stands.
got a talking plant.
Great. Thank you so much for going through those exercises with us. Just a note that recently Rite Aid entered into a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice where Rite Aid will need to make their website accessible for people with disabilities, particularly in regards to signing up for COVID-19 vaccines. Pharmacies like Walgreens, Rite Aid, and CVS have worked very hard to implement and make available vaccines for everyone. And people with disabilities are navigating a very complicated space and trying to get access to the same information and access to the same scheduling and access to shots as everybody else. Ruben?
Thanks, Sandy. This is Ruben. So we're going to talk a little bit now about this slide, which is titled, How Do We Narrow the Digital Divide? This slide contains a photo of a person using a Braille display assistive technology device, and it is seated just in front of the individual's keyboard. So first off, before we go any further in regards to this slide, we're going to talk a little bit about how we narrow the digital divide. And we're going to share with you some of our experiences with 2 test cases pertaining to digital technology, either procured or developed here at our university during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's really important that we mention these test cases not as opportunities to call out or to point a finger or assign blame to any university department or unit, but instead to really highlight the success of these cases and how we work together. And that's one of the critical themes that we'll be talking about as a recipe for success, is how we work together and collaborated to ensure that our digital technology was accessible and usable to all individuals on our campus. Sandy's videos and presentation might give a sense that it's a lot of work and that it is overwhelming. And I just want to reassure everyone that knowing the digital divide can be done, and we can do it successfully and seamlessly. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on in our presentation. So as we all may recall, during the COVID-19 pandemic, during the phase under which we participated in campus surveillance, we as a university procured a tool known as the Safer Badgers application. This was a tool that we downloaded to our phones, and we used it to schedule our testing appointments to determine if we had COVID-19. This tool also provided us with our testing results and then also activated our building access badge. This tool behind the scenes was developed by a third-party vendor. It was procured by 1 additional Big Ten university, and altogether 3 universities within the Big Ten use this tool. After we procured the tool and we underwent a digital accessibility evaluation through the Center for User Experience, we learned that there were some accessibility barriers with this tool, particularly with screen magnification, reflow issues, and kind of reflow means that when you scan or you zoom in, that it pushes the content down into a nice vertical column as opposed to just zooming straight into the content and smudging it out onto the periphery. So basically when you scroll down through the content, you continue to have access to all the information. There were color contrasting issues as well. And we were able to very fortunately engage and collaborate with our campus partners, who in turn reached out to the vendor or the developer of the application, and they were able to address some coding and some color contrasting and ensure that a user of this application had a seamless and accessible experience. A second tool that was developed in-house, and it pertains to the campus visitor tour. So for many of us who have participated in the campus tour, we know it is an in-person tour. It gives us valuable information for our prospective students and families about the university, our academic programs, our degrees and courses of study, information about housing, dining, athletics, and generally information about student life. And so we know through the COVID-19 pandemic that we needed to de-densify our campus, and we needed to move our operations to be digital and remote. So our campus visitor tour was recreated to occur in an online distance format, and it also incorporated features such as the use of an interactive map and multimedia tools. And so in partnership with some of the developers and designers of this tool, we were able to work collaboratively to ensure that accessibility features were provided not only in the digital tool, but also as part of the remote presentation experience that accompanied the use of the tool. So altogether, our collaboration, both from the Center for User Experience and our cross-campus partners, was fantastic to work receptively and open-mindedly to ensure accessibility of our digital technology during the COVID-19 pandemic. On our next slide, I mentioned some recipes for success, and one of those recipes being collaboration. This slide, which is titled Recipe for Success, has 4 bullet points, and One of the bullet points that we would really like to stress as being the best recipe for attaining success in developing, procuring, and using accessible digital technology is listening to the individuals who are using that technology, ensuring that we capture their feedback and what their experience is with the technology. Not every person who identifies as blind or having vision loss will experience technology in the exact same way. We recommend, as mentioned earlier, collaborating across teams and particularly with accessibility professionals to receive some information, guidance on how to design inclusively. One of the things we really want to note that with the learning experience from the pandemic is clearly communicating with our stakeholders about what is not accessible with that piece of digital technology. It's perfectly acceptable to state these are some features that currently are not working. However, to help you get around these general barriers or to help ensure that we are removing these barriers for you, here's a way for you to get alternative access to the benefits or the privileges that that piece of technology offers. And a final recipe for success was organizationally moving towards a goal of shared responsibility. We know that as an institution, when we need to move towards a collective approach towards ensuring that accessibility is a central component of everything we do, from developing to designing to implementing digital technology.
Thanks, Ruben. This is Jess. So let's talk about that last ingredient in the recipe for success that Ruben touched on, which is building the shared responsibility for digital accessibility. We believe that this is one of the key elements here in reaching success of a more inclusive digital experience at UW-Madison. So on the next slide, I want to share what we learned during the pandemic. These are things that we knew about, but as we've stated earlier, they intensified during the pandemic, and they became central to how we pivot and develop our efforts towards creating that more inclusive experience for folks through our technology. So we learned these through the experiences of people with disabilities in our UW-Madison community, and we're grateful to them for sharing the barriers that they experienced and working with us on those. So the lessons that we learned are that accessibility is a shared campus responsibility and not a system. So this means that there's not one mechanism or central place where all digital accessibility comes out of. We have to do this together, and we each have to do our part. So it does become system-wide though, right, when everyone is doing their part. So when somebody is practicing accessibility in their unit, making a Word document accessible, that is contributing to a greater system that is more inclusive. We also learned that we should not frame accessibility as additional work. In the past, it has been talked about this way. But instead, we need to think about it as completing work that's already being done, right? You're already going to make that Word document. If you also make it accessible, then you're doing so using inclusive practices. And finally, the key is to empower university units to utilize guides and resources to begin incorporating accessibility practices. Because this is a shared responsibility, because it happens at a unit level, an institutional level, and an individual level, we need to provide the resources to allow all levels in that space to actually practice digital accessibility. So before we talk about how we have empowered university units and built an infrastructure to do so, I want to give you a sense of the landscape that was kind of before us. These are just the variables that we had in terms of a culture and a situation. We're not saying any of it is right or wrong, but we want you to know what influenced the decisions and the actions that we took. So on this first slide, about our landscape, I want to address culture. And this slide has an aerial view of the Madison, Wisconsin skyline with both Lake Mendota and Lake Monona. And the strip of land between the two lakes is the isthmus. I believe it's looking down on John Mullen Drive. So our culture at UW-Madison, and this may resonate with some of you, we're highly decentralized. We have independent decision-making among the units, and that includes independent funding. So folks manage their budgets and their funding at a unit level. It's a large institution, and we have a lot of units separately creating, managing, procuring, and delivering technology on their own. So that means that we have a very complex, very variable landscape in terms of what technology is coming in, and I'll touch more on that later. And on the next slide, I want to talk about another part of our landscape, which is awareness. And on this slide, you can see there's a sky view of the Observatory Drive area of the University of Wisconsin campus. So in terms of awareness of digital accessibility, before the pandemic and during the early pandemic, there was a low but growing awareness of digital accessibility. Now, one thing that came out of the pandemic is that there are many more people at UW-Madison who are thinking about and practicing and talking about digital accessibility, which is fantastic. And I would say that the awareness of it has grown exponentially during the experience we had with COVID-19. And on the next slide, I want to touch on our community. This slide has a lovely photo of students on the dock on Lake Mendota at sunset. You can see they're kind of backlit, so they appear to be shadows. But they represent our community, which is faculty and staff and students who want to do the best for students, colleagues, and visitor and program participants. So folks are really working hard out there, and the pivot to remote was a major shift. And I just want to thank everyone who did include digital accessibility into that pivot and who made that happen. At the same time, we're all juggling a lot of different roles and responsibilities. So, you're all doing your best, and we are here to help. So I'll speak on that more as well later. I also want to touch on technology again. So here you can see, to represent this topic, there's a photo of an overhead view of students working on laptops in a lecture hall. I think this is really representative of our digital or our technology landscape at UW-Madison. Everyone is using a laptop. Everyone is using multiple devices. Technology is central to what we do here, whether or not we're, working and learning remotely, or we are learning and working in a campus building. So the technology in our campus is an ever more complex ecosystem. We see it change every semester, if not more often. And again, it's often changing at that unit level, where units are making their own decisions about what technology to bring into the ecosystem. And then finally, on the next slide, there's a photo of a sign language interpreter communicating with a student. And this photo is representative of the topic the slide, which is accessibility. So from an accessibility standpoint at UW-Madison, we provide the university with the tools and services to include accessibility in physical spaces. The examples of this include elevators and curb cuts. But we haven't had the same expectations and rigor in the digital space. I think that technology can feel like it's new. It can feel like the idea of inclusivity in digital spaces is new. But it's actually very much needed. It's actually something that folks haven't been able to experience when they need it for a long time. So, part of this shared responsibility and the efforts that we're making here at UW-Madison are to bring that rigor into the digital space as well. And I'll pass it over to.
Thanks so much, Jess. This is Ruben again. So Jess kind of highlighted a little bit of our accessibility here at UW-Madison, and I'd like to just zoom out and give an overview of some of the university's major milestones in terms of our accessibility journey. So in 2000, we were actually one of the first universities in the country to establish a web accessibility policy. This policy became effective, I believe, in 2003, and it pointed our web pages to be in conformance with some of the web content accessibility guidelines, which are a pretty readily defined set of standards that are adopted by the federal government. In 2017, we received a notification from the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, which investigates complaints alleging discrimination on the basis of disability, that some of our campus websites were not accessible. Fortunately, and through that wonderful UW-Madison spirit of collaboration, we were able to very quickly resolve that Office for Civil Rights complaint and to bring those web pages into accessibility compliance. However, that complaint, along with a peer review study completed by some visiting institutions of how UW-Madison approaches digital accessibility, highlighted a recommendation for a center to be formed that would focus on digital accessibility and the user experience. And so in 2018, through the gracious support of the university, the Center for User Experience was founded. And this is the center that Jess and Sandy work out of, along with Kurt. And in 2020, with continuing on our accessibility journey, the university recognized that the ADA coordinator position, which has historically been a split position with other responsibilities, was revamped to be fully focused, a full-time position fully focused on accessibility and disability access. And so I became the first ADA coordinator in January of 2020, the first full-time ADA coordinator. And just recently, we're very happy to share that we worked with a cross-campus drafting committee to take our 2000 web accessibility policy and to redraft it and refresh it to broaden the scope of accessibility to be applicable to a wide array of digital information technology tools. And we just recently presented our policy to the Shared Governance IT, or Information Technology Committee, a few weeks ago, and we're hoping to hear back within the next few weeks as to an update regarding our policy revision process. So those are the major university milestones on our accessibility journey. And I'm going to turn it over to Sandy.
I've got this one, Ruben. So this is Jess. So I want to touch on some of that building of infrastructure and empowering people. And that'll take us back to the milestone that Ruben just touched on, which is the founding of the Center for User Experience in 2018. We were founded as a central resource for UW-Madison in the space of digital accessibility. And our charge overall is to create a more accessible, usable digital experience for everyone. We pair digital accessibility with user experience and usability to reach that charge. So we are a team of 7 full-time staff and a group of terrific student employees. But given the scope of technology at UW-Madison, that's not a very big team. And even if we had a huge team, we couldn't do it all. So we've built an infrastructure that empowers people to build accessibility practices into their work. We have some principles when we think about digital accessibility that we wanted to share. So the first is that we can't make your stuff accessible. You can definitely hire people out to make your existing stuff accessible. There are vendors who will do that. But really it's about incorporating these practices into your processes so that they're sustainable. So we felt that like one of our charges is to create infrastructure that allows you to make your stuff accessible. And related to that, it needs to be baked into everything you do. It's a practice. It should be a central principle to your work and your team, and it requires a collective effort. It means everybody in your team is working towards more accessible digital resources. And finally, we believe that right doing should be a pervasive form of business practices for your group. This is, I think, many of the presentations that I've attended today have touched on this, which is that practicing diversity, equity, inclusion, justice means thinking about it in big and small ways. And so that means, you know, in your everyday business, how can you be more inclusive? How can you incorporate digital accessibility practices into that everyday work? And I'm going to turn it over to Sandy, and she's going to talk a little bit about the specific pieces of infrastructure that we've built for UW-Madison.
Thank you so much, Jess. So we are rolling out a large-scale training service to UW-Madison. The first of these trainings is the Disability and Ableism Awareness Training, which is a Canvas course that's freely available for exploratory view at your own self-pace in learning about disability, in learning about ableism, and in learning about ways to be more inclusive, both in our thinking and our culture, as well as also in the way that we speak and write. So that Canvas course link is being dropped in chat for you during this presentation, and also the link to the OHR catalog, where we have synchronous trainings scheduled for this disability and ableism awareness training, so that you can get together with us and do activities and practice some of the learnings in this training. More trainings will be coming out for content accessibility, as well as baking in digital accessibility for managers into business and operational decisions, and digital accessibility for designers and developers. So more to come on that. We also have currently an evaluation and consulting service available. We've had it available since 2017. So though the Center for User Experience was formalized in 2018, the Digital Accessibility Program at UW-Madison has been in existence since June of 2017. And we've been doing this evaluation service, and we do consulting and coaching in that service as well. So that's sort of been our training for small groups and for teams and for individuals since 2017. So if you're interested in getting your content evaluated, we do provide reported barriers. We also give you recommendations for how to resolve those barriers. And we also do coaching and a little bit of training and some consulting with you to get you on your way to fixing those barriers. So we'll drop the link in chat for getting access to that evaluation service and requesting an evaluation. And then also we have a library of guides. Our guides cover topics from what is web accessibility to how to incorporate digital accessibility into content and development. So we'll go ahead and drop those links in chat as well for our guide library. Passing it back to you, Ruben.
Thanks so much, Sandy. This is Ruben again, and on this slide, moving toward the shared responsibility, we're just going to highlight again what Jess and Sandy have both emphasized. We're building the resources for our university to ensure that our digital technology is accessible. However, as mentioned earlier, accessibility is a shared responsibility. It's not a system or a task completed by an isolated group. It requires a concerted commitment. It shouldn't be viewed as extra work, but instead we should view it as the work that we naturally do as either part of our business process of procuring or acquiring technology, or whether we're simply developing our next Canvas course, developing a training, writing up a Word document that will highlight our annual report, or simply creating a PowerPoint presentation for our next department meeting. When we design accessibly, we bake it in, and we create a more accessible digital landscape for all individuals on our campus. As mentioned earlier, accessibility guides have been created, and we encourage you to start locally. Start with your own digital resources and tools, and the more that you use and bake into your own practices, the more streamlined accessibility becomes. On our next slide, in the theme of building that shared responsibility, we'll talk a little bit about this car that we've been building. And on this slide, we see an image of the Bucky wagon on the field of Camp Randall Stadium being driven by the Spirit Squad. So we've built this car of resources, expertise to the Center for User Experience, as well as accessibility evaluation tools. But we need drivers to raise awareness and to put these tools to the test and use them. So as part of our shared responsibility for making accessibility a central tenet of our operations, we need our university peers to learn about accessibility standards, practices, and review their own operations and begin incorporating accessibility practices. At the community, we need to change how we do things. Technology is always changing. However, if we develop procure, acquire, or use technology that's focused on some core accessibility practices will have accessible technology, because these accessibility practices are stable and they're related to the same core user needs. For example, ensuring that our technology is able to take text and convert it to speech. So in other words, ensuring it's screen reader accessible. Ensuring that our multimedia has audio captions. Ensuring that our digital technology is keyboard navigable. So for individuals who are unable to use a mouse or use the keyboard as their main mode of working through technology. Ensuring that there's effective color contrast. And lastly, also ascertaining that our multimedia converts or has captions available to take speech to convert it into text-based or visual format. So our awareness of these barriers, we affirm, does not create more work, but instead alters the way that we approach our processes and behaviors with designing and procuring new tools.
Thanks, Ruben. This is Jess again. So as we look forward, we also look back, right? Our community has come a long way in terms of awareness of digital accessibility, practicing digital accessibility, but we can continue to move forward, and there's a long way to go to have a fully inclusive digital experience at UW-Madison. On the next slide, we have a vision, and we hope it's a shared vision for everyone here at this presentation and also everyone at UW-Madison. It's one that we'll be sharing more widely. But we want to get to a digital landscape in which all members of our community can independently and robustly participate in the activities that they want to participate in. That means that they may not need to seek out an accommodation, that they may not need to seek out assistance, that they can reach their goals on their own, and everyone has that same path of doing so. And we also see a future, oh, I'm sorry, Sandy. Last slide, thank you. Back a couple more. Thank you. We also see a future in which UW-Madison is committed to ensuring that our digital campus is accessible and free from barriers for all members of the university community. So how will we get there? That's the big question, right? On the next slide, I'll talk about some of the ways we'll do that. So on this slide, we have 4 rectangles. Each has a number in it, 1, 2, 3, and 4, numerically and consecutively. So the rectangle in number 1 reads, creating shared standards, plans, and understanding. So this relates to the digital accessibility policy refresh that Ruben touched on earlier. That will include a whole set of clear standards, an implementation plan that is kind of spanned out over several years, and all of the training and resources that Sandy touched on to create that understanding. So that will be a central pillar in terms of moving forward towards our vision. Number 2 reads creating community. So this is really important. We know that we can't do anything without community, and especially when we are trying to make our community more inclusive, we have to come together. So in the spirit of shared responsibility, again, we want to create a community of folks who are talking to each other, who are sharing tips and practices and all of that. And so there's a few things in play here. There's a digital accessibility community of practice that has just started. At UW-Madison, we have a community focused on design, user-centered design, community of practice there as well. And then, of course, there will be the trainings, and as part of the policy, we hope to have a network of people, at least one person within each unit, who is kind of keeping an eye on digital accessibility within their unit and reaching out to the center as they need resources or guidance. Number 3 is building on our infrastructure. So we've talked about what we've built already, including services, guides, and resources. We're going to continue to build that out. There will be more guides. There will be more training, as Sandy noticed. We're also exploring tools that can help folks on an individual level as they are, for example, building a Canvas course, identify any accessibility barriers and fix them during the creation of that course or the updating of that course. Again, kind of in that spirit of practicing digital accessibility within your processes. And finally, I'm sorry, Sandy. Finally, number 4 reads, changing how we add technology into our ecosystem. So this relates to kind of thinking about how we might, as a university or as a unit, decide what technology we bring in. So we know we have a need for that technology, but we're hoping that we can help folks think about accessibility as one of the things that you are including in your requirements when you're procuring a piece of technology, or when you're building a piece of technology, building it using inclusive design and development practices. So we have conversations and partnerships running that will help to help folks include digital accessibility in procurement and build, including a guide that we have that perhaps we can share the link out to procuring accessible technology. Thanks, Sandy. Next slide. And I'll pass it over to Ruben.
Thanks so much, Jess. And on behalf of Sandy, Kurt, and Jess, we'd just like to close out by affirming that we have these resources available to us. We're building the car. We know we have a shared commitment of responsibility, and we'd like to affirm that it takes all of us. Our institutional diversity statement reads that UW-Madison values the contributions of each person and respects the profound ways their identity, culture, background, experience, status, abilities, and opinion enrich the university community. Just like it takes all of us to eradicate isms such as racism, sexism, or ableism, it takes all of us to achieve the university's mission by creating a welcoming and inclusive community for people from every background, including individuals with disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ruben. So we have about 9 minutes for questions, and I see we've been having a lot coming through as we've been talking, and a big thank you to Kurt for sharing some resources and some answers to those questions. We welcome any other questions that folks might have about the presentation or digital accessibility in general or digital accessibility at UW-Madison. But you also can contact us at the Center for User Experience. We've included, I hope, in the PowerPoint, I believe there's a link to the PowerPoint on the presentation page. So to speak to a couple of these, I think, it looks like we had some questions about screen readers. And Kurt has answered that. Are those built free and built into all devices? Or are these potentially services folks have to pay for to use? Just thinking about a financial accessibility as well, which is a great point. Sandy, can I ask you to speak to screen readers and what's free and what may require?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So now screen readers are often built into the OS of a device, into the operating system of the device. So for, phones, you'll get a phone if it's, at least if it's a Google, Windows, or iOS phone, Apple iPhone, it will have a screen reader baked in, and those are free. VoiceOver is very good. Narrator is on Windows machines as well, and it's pretty good. The key thing is that everyone has different needs in terms of what they need out of a screen reader. Probably the most used paid screen reader is JAWS, based on annual reports that we read coming from webaim.org. And it's very expensive because it infers a lot. So it's a smoother experience for screen reader users, whereas free screen readers, while some of them are very good, like VoiceOver, and usable and easy to understand, like the one I was using, easy in this space that is still developing and evolving in terms of user experience, usability wise. They vary in terms of like how accurate perhaps they may be. So basically users have to try it out and find the one that fits them. Yeah, that's basically it. So the free ones, they're getting better every year, I feel like. I've been using screen readers since 2016, and they seem to be improving every year. And the use of HTML is improving pretty much every year in terms of how people exhaust HTML to be able to make user experiences more accessible. And that's exactly what the screen reader is reading. It's reading the code. So does that help at all, or are there any follow-up questions regarding that?
Yeah, so Sandy, we can also touch on making an accommodation request for a screen reader. Perhaps, Ruben, could you touch on that potentially?
Sure. So an accommodation request would normally be made by the individual who is experiencing the barrier. So normally they would undergo the interactive process. They would, if they're a student, they would work with the McBurney Disability Resource Center, and if they're an employee, they would typically work with their divisional disability representative in collaboration with the Employee Disability Resources Office. We would engage with that individual through the interactive process, ascertain the disability, what the barriers are. And so it could result in the provision of a reasonable accommodation, such as an assistive technology device. However, we would also want to look, is there something that we could address in the landscape? Could we remove the barrier? Is there a piece of code, or is there code that could be updated to make a piece of technology accessible? Many individuals with disabilities, such as me, for example, you might see me wearing a neck loop. This is my assistive technology device. I provide it for myself. It's not something the university provides to me. And it helps me to convert audio sound directly into my hearing aids. So many individuals have their own assistive technology device, and so they don't necessarily need an accommodation. They just need that piece of technology to be accessible. And that's really the aim that we're working towards. When we have to provide a reasonable accommodation, we have to start that process over and over and over again. So if you have the same piece of inaccessible technology, you're providing that reasonable accommodation over and over again to every person who's experiencing that barrier. So we're kind of reframing that approach and instead focusing on accessibility to make that piece of technology work with that screen reader application. I hope I've answered that question appropriately and based on what was being asked. If not, please do reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to follow up with you.
Yeah, the thing with screen readers is screen readers are assistive technology to support people who are blind or have low vision. So if someone ends up needing to get it as an accommodation, it may be because they had a recent accident or something like that, you know, and they need to use it at work. Screen readers only work, as Ruben was saying, if the technology around them is accessible. So whatever the screen reader is reading, that website, the screen reader is not going to solve the accessibility barriers that exist on that website. That website needs to be accessible in order for the screen reader to read that content and exhume it into an auditory experience that a person who is blind can then hear and navigate based on what they're hearing. So just, you know, trying to sort of clarify those pieces.
Thank you, Sandy and Ruben. I want to give kudos to the folks in the chat who are advocating to add accessibility to the anti-racist rubric that there was a presentation on that I attended. It's a fantastic tool. Like, the work there is so terrific, and it would be absolutely right to include accessibility in it. So thank you for that. There's a comment that the Ophthalmology and Visual Sciences Department has a low vision clinic and works closely with the Wisconsin Council of the Blind and Visually Impaired, where you can try different readers depending on your needs and tech savvy. Fantastic. Thank you for that, Jessica Arendas. And then another question, what would be some good training courses if we want to learn how to use screen readers like NVDA? Any thoughts on that, Ruben?
Yeah. So for training, we are going to be rolling out, the next training will be accessible content development. So, and in that, it'll include training on how to test using a screen reader. In terms of, so there's, you know, if you want to use a screen reader for accessibility testing, that will be included there. We're hoping to get a pilot draft out of, for that at the end of the spring semester, pilot that out in the summer session, and then roll that out, you know, officially in the fall. But available in the summer. So if you're interested in being part of the pilot, go ahead and pop your information in the form that's here, the questions. Go ahead and reach out to us and we'll add you, because we're amassing a pilot population to go through that training. But if you want to learn about screen readers for occupational therapy reasons, you know, to learn how to use a screen reader because you need to depend on it to be able to use the web. Groups like the Council for the Blind are fantastic for training people for free on screen reader usage. And we've met with them before for other projects in the past. So reach out if you have further questions about that, and we certainly can help facilitate you with getting connected with the resource that fits your need.
Thanks, Sandy. We are at our time today. I just want to thank, on behalf of Ruben and Sandy, thank everyone for joining us today. We are so glad to have the opportunity to talk with you about digital accessibility and you know, start to create a community here. If anyone is interested in any of the community of practices or any of the trainings or have other questions, please use our email, centerforux@wisc.edu. Reach out and we will connect with you. Thanks so much, everyone.